No idea what you're going to call me when you call me what you call me, right?
Sometimes I have an idea, but like that one, I didn't know till really it came out of my mouth.
Right. That's what I'm feeling here. Yeah. Wow. Okay. Well, hey, I'm glad you're in the sun, and it's beautiful here in Maine too. It's chilly. Can you believe it?
Really?
68 balmy degrees. Yeah.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
Mm.
That's kind of weird.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
is it? I don't know. Is it? Does it get kind of chilly out there sometimes?
Not this time of year. Usually, you can usually count on it being pretty hot. So,
Mm.
but I know it's always pretty toasty out your way.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it certainly is, and it is no different. Actually, it's been a little cool. It's been in the lower 100s. It's been, I think, 105, 103, so it's been really nice.
Wow. So the egg will not fry quickly on the
No,
sidewalk. Yeah.
no, no.
Wow.
Yeah, you could, if you spill your eggs, you can leave them for maybe an hour
Wow.
before they get cooked out there. So, yeah.
Slow roast. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So,
Wow.
the guest today, this is someone new. A friend of mine suggested one of this gentleman, Glen Gregory Means. And the reason he suggested him is that Glenn has been interested in UFOs his entire life, including many years in the military. So he was in the military, and so that's sort of quite a bit of what we talk about is kind of sightings in the military, how the military handles them, his colleagues and sightings
Wow.
they've had, and stuff like that, which is apropos given a story I wrote just yesterday, which I'm sure we'll talk about in the news section of the show, which is coming up in just a minute. But yeah, so that's mostly what we talked about, which is a lot of fun. And I should say, this is actually Friday that you and I are talking, because even though a lot of times when people pre-record, they try to give the illusion, that that they're talking on the same day the show is airing. I'm not good at that. I don't know if you've ever tried, but I always screw up, and I always mention something related to the day, so I just do not have the savvy to pull that off. But actually, I will be posting the show today for podcasters, so they'll be hearing it earlier. They usually have to wait till Tuesday. This time they're going to get it early. I've been posting it on Tuesday because on Monday nights, Tuesday morning for many is when the show airs on KGRA, which this show will still air at its regular time on KGRA, but podcasters will get it early, and that's because I'm headed to Budapest.
Right. So exciting.
Yeah, it is very exciting to go to the Mars set. And I've been watching this Mars television show from National Geographic. I had to pay for it on iTunes because it's not streaming anywhere free, I don't think, right now. But it was only $10 for the first season, so pretty cheap. Or actually, I got it on Amazon. And it is a really cool show, especially for space geeks like me, because they've got interviews with it's kind of a new way of doing kind of a documentary and drama at the same time. And it's similar to, they kind of did this with Band of Brothers, where you have interviews with the real people, and then you have drama. And then you have, in this, they embed a little bit of interviews in the middle too, and then drama. So it goes between 2016, which is the here and now, and speaking with people, a lot of SpaceX in there, because SpaceX is really focused on going to Mars. So switching between 2016 with great interviews from some really good scientists and NASA people and everything, and even drama on the 2016 side. So, for instance, they were there filming one of the SpaceX launches, and people may remember this, when their rocket exploded, which was a big setback. Luckily, they're back on track. But also with Scott Kelly going to space for a year, a lot of stuff like this. So you get to see it's neat to see it interspersed with the drama, because you see the faces of the SpaceX employees, and they're when you have that much emotion, you can't hide it, in front of the camera. Nerves and everything fall by the wayside. So you get these genuine expressions of horror and sadness and stuff. And luckily, no one died in that one. But they did cover the shuttle, because this show is actually kind of terrifying. I would be terrified to go into space on one of these rockets because, you don't know how it's going to work or if it's going to work. And I don't know. I'm old enough to remember where I was. I was in a high school science class when the space shuttle blew up, and it was, for me, really sad, really shocking.
Yes.
And do you remember where you were?
I was standing in a grocery store. This is I'm not exaggerating at all. My friend owned a grocery store in York, Maine, and he walked out and he goes, I wish the space shuttle's going off. He goes, I wish that thing would just blow up so that it stopped blowing all the money on that project. And a girl came out a few minutes later and she said, you got your wish.
You're kidding.
No, that actually happened. And boy, did he feel bad. I mean, he never wanted to talk about that.
So he wasn't normally just a total jerk face. Like some people revel in that. Oh, kind of was.
He is a friend of mine.
So, oh, wow, that is crazy. I could imagine he probably felt awful.
Yeah. So this Mars thing, it's do they call it a docudrama or something like that?
I don't know what they title it. That's a good question. I'll see, but it's really cool because they try to stick to how it would happen and the risks and everything. So it is pretty suspenseful. It's kind of called, at least IMDb calls it, an adventure drama sci-fi. People can probably hear me clicking my mouse. I think I got this mouse that clicks really loud, and I'm sure people on the show have noticed, heard it click, click, click. I got a bunch of promotional stuff because I did interview one of the scientists for a piece I put up on Huffington Post, and hopefully some of you got to read it. If not, you can just Google me in Huffington Post and find my page and look at that. It was really great. He's in the show quite a bit because he runs the Mars Society, which is an organization that is focused on getting people to Mars. So they are working with all of these different projects that are working towards that. Of course, the top being, most likely being SpaceX. But yeah, there's not really a term for it, I guess.
What is the proper title to that?
Of the show?
Yeah.
Mars.
Okay. Hey,
Seriously.
you were talking earlier about how dangerous it would be to go up, in general. And I remember I had a conversation years ago with Alan Bean. He was the fourth man on the moon. And I said to him, while you were standing on the moon, were you like panicking that you just wanted to get home? And he said, never even thought of it. I was totally shocked because I would be like so nervous. I mean, it would be like two-sided, real excited at the same time. But I would just feel like, wow, am I really going to get home or not?
One of the astronauts had a great quote that the whole thing is terrifying until the craft lands. And so it's the most terrifying thing you experience until it lands, and then it becomes the most fun thing you've ever done in your life.
Wow.
Because once that it's done, you're alive. You can reflect and be like, "Wow, that was freaking cool,"
Yeah.
So
he did say. I remember he said he was looking down at his feet, down at the moon surface, and he just kind of shook his head and said, "Wow, I'm really here." I mean, that is amazing. And now he actually does paintings, really great paintings, and he actually took some of the moon dust off of his boots. And he puts it in his paintings.
Wow, interesting.
Alan Bean, you can see his gallery. But so I said, he said something about his boots, and I said, well, are you can actually take those boots home? And he goes, well, not exactly.
Yeah, there's
in other words, he did anyway.
Yeah, and I think they all did that. There's like this unwritten kind of thing where it's like, just stash something away for yourself, because I've heard these stories from pretty much every astronaut. In fact, Edgar Mitchell got in a little bit of trouble. I think he was trying to sell something on eBay that they said he shouldn't have had in the first place.
Wow,
But
I hope not a moon. They say no one has a moon rock. We talked about that too.
yeah,
You know,
someone
people
attempted to
claim
sell
they do
it.
all the time.
Yeah, people claim they do, and they're mostly not true. But the one of them was legit. There was a sale, an attempted sale, and NASA said, "Hey, you can't sell that. You weren't supposed to have it in the first place." So they had to, they confiscated it or something. But yeah, pretty cool,
Wow.
pretty cool. So very exciting. And one of the really cool interviews in this too is Scott Kelly's daughter. She's such an articulate kid. She's just a teenager talking about her dad being away for a year and how scary that was. But she's really great, very insightful, very cool. So it's a cool show. I definitely recommend it for people. And season 2 will be coming up. And that's for the Mars set is in Budapest. So I'll be on the set on Monday and Tuesday. And I'll be traveling all night tonight and most of tomorrow.
That'd be great to see that culture. I'm really envious.
People say it's gorgeous out there. So I would love to see Russia, even though you don't want to see any more of it.
Trade ya.
All right. So why don't we go ahead and head into the news?
All right. So this was written by yourself. And this is a story that goes all the way back to 1975. It's titled "Regularly Occurring UFO Outran Jets."
Oh, I remember this when it happened. I was 2 years old.
Former Yugoslav general. So this back in 1975, the Yugoslav Air Force jets saw a strange multicolored glowing orb, but every time they tried to investigate, it would outrun their jet fighters. And finally, after failed attempts to get closer, to get a closer look and facing ridicule for reporting the incidents, they just chose to ignore it, which I think is very interesting. And this is according to, now I'm going to might have a little trouble with his name. This is according to General Zvonimir Jurevich, and he's a former commander of the Air Force and Air Defense of Yugoslavia. So the story was first revealed in 2011 in a book on the 172 Aviation Regiment, which was led by Jurevich. So he recently discussed the UFO encounters again in an interview with Sputnik International. Really something that they just plain chose to ignore it, like it'll just go away after all the ridicule.
Yeah, well, and it works, and I think that, we hear this same thing over and over again, and John Alexander, and people get upset with him because he's like, oh, he's trying to claim there's not a cover-up, even though he knows better, or something like this, and he's just saying that he went to look to see if there's a cover-up, and there wasn't so much a cover-up as people just brushing UFO sightings and events under the rug, because just like Jurjevic explains in this story, when they just face too much ridicule and nobody really cares enough, so they just are like, well, screw it then, I'm not going to talk about UFOs. So yeah, it's interesting here too, because he says that one day they tried to kind of catch it. He tried to hunt it. So they, just in case it was foreign, he got together some other men, fighters and jet fighters, and they decided to fly up unannounced. So they didn't tell anybody they were going to do this. Fly each to different locations so they can kind of swoop in on this thing when it showed up, hoping it would show up. Sure enough, it did, and they couldn't catch it. It would just outpace them. So they actually scrambled a couple Soviet MiGs from Belgrade. And these things were supersonic. They were the fastest thing they had, and they couldn't catch it either. And so this thing was super fast. And he recently talked to Sputnik about this. But, it's funny because Billy Cox, the writer for Sarasota, Herald Tribune, but that was a while ago, wrote about this a bit, and he had the original story from the book translated, or he found a translation. And he talked about how there was the last incident that happened with this thing. Everybody saw it, and people are kind of going crazy, going like, hey, you need to do something about this, General. And he's like, nope. And they're like, why not? There's like 100 people that see this thing, and you claim that you don't see it. And he's like, I don't see it, and we're doing nothing about it. He said he raised his voice to make sure everybody heard him. Just get back to work. And he says he did that because he was just done. He didn't want to deal with it. Nobody cared. All he got was heartache from it. And you hear this over and over again from military people.
And the fact that didn't the events cease as well?
Yeah, so that last time where he told everybody to ignore it was the last time they saw it, and I think they said it was like February 12th, 1927, and this whole
1975.
1975, and this whole thing happened only over a few weeks. So
yeah, so this is the true story. If you ignore it, it'll go away.
Yeah.
Wow.
He ignored it and it went away. The UFO said, "Fine. I didn't want to play with you anymore anyway."
Yeah.
So, and lots of sightings in the 70s, so.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a really interesting one.
It is a great story, right.
I love it. I think that was a cool one.
I like the article.
Some other headlines, good headlines, were a little far and few between this week. Interesting enough. But there is a cool, if you're a fan of the Foo Fighters, I listed a link. So,
oh, yeah. Saw that.
Yeah, there's a music video, and the Foo Fighters, of course, their name is about UFOs. And they are, I've never heard personally David Grohl talk about UFOs. And I don't know, maybe, I think we have posted something about interviews, but nothing stands out right now. He's the lead for the Foo Fighters. But they are into UFOs, obviously. They have the name Foo Fighters. And in their artwork and everything, it reflects occasionally. But this new music video they just posted is called "The Sky is a Neighborhood." And I don't know that everybody's kind of making the link, but the video is kind of like, with a bunch of UFOs and stuff. It's pretty cool. He's got his daughters in it. And it seems like, listening to the lyrics and the thing, he's talking about how there's all these UFOs, that, there's all these other things out there. The sky is a neighborhood. But it's a pretty cool video.
Well, I've always wondered about the name and if there was any connection there. And, or they just pulled the name out of, some other type of reference, perhaps. But, when I started hearing the term Foo Fighters, I heard the band first, and then I heard, the Foo Fighters secondly. So, yeah. And it's funny, people still talk about them, as possible, they come up with all types of theories, possible time travel. So someone would watch, World War II happen. I don't know what they are, but they were seen by lots and lots of people. Orbs mostly, green sometimes.
There was an interesting story that came out. That was the headline's a little misleading. I don't know if people saw this one. Drone or UFOs, police yet to identify over 100 flying objects spotted at Delhi airport. But I think they just wanted to get some excitement. They only mention UFO like once. But actually what they talk about is, especially with drones, there are people flying them all around the Delhi airport, flying stuff all around the Delhi airport. And they're so inundated, their job, they try to investigate every single unknown in the area, just to be for air safety reasons. But they're so inundated with reports and stuff, although they attribute them mostly to people flying drones around the city so much now, that they're backed up, that they can't, they're all still unidentified because there's so many of these cases and they take so long to investigate that, and there's the UK APROX board or something like that. This is a cool government agency in Britain that we've gotten a lot of cool UFO reports from in the past, because they do the same. They investigate near misses, actually, of unidentified objects. And sometimes they can identify the objects, once in a while, though, rarely, but there'll be a couple reports a year, and we usually report on those that they can't identify, that are really strange. And it's just now that there's so many of these things flying around and it's such a long process to investigate, some of these agencies, like this agency in Delhi, the police in Delhi, are way backed up on investigating these things.
Wow. Now, do you think that in a situation like this that they may enforce some type of ban against drones if it gets too carried away?
I think so. There's more of that happening. The issue just is resources, I think, for some nations. So, for example, India probably doesn't have the budget that like we would have at our airports to get more people to check these things out and enforce those sorts of things, and throw people in jail or fine them or whatever they do if they're flying around there. So it's probably mostly a resource issue, because I'm sure we probably have the issue just as much, if not more, here.
Yeah, I'm sure. I've heard that drones are definitely regulated here, but I don't really know what. I mean, anyone can fly a small drone up and around in their own property and things like that. But when it comes to, near an airfield or something, I'm sure there's going to be regulations. I'm not familiar with them, that's all.
There's a bunch of them. Oh, the other thing it talked about, too, is a mysterious laser that a lot of the planes are seeing, and they haven't identified where it's coming from yet, but they're looking at it. They think it's something on the ground, though, something that has a laser that is just, pointing up, and they've got to go tell them, hey, move that laser. So,
right. Yeah, that can be pretty dangerous.
But thus far, speaking about the eclipse, I have not seen, and we've only got like a minute left, so we can't talk a lot about it, but I have not seen any decent UFO sightings from the eclipse. I've just seen little things that look like birds and flares, but nothing significant.
Right. You know what happens? No, I have not either. But, there's so many people looking up at the sky, like when the Phoenix Lights happened and the comet, it's the same type of situation. So you're bound to get something coming in.
Yeah, you would think so. So I'm a bit surprised. Although there are a bunch of photos, there definitely were more reports, but the quality of the reports, unfortunately, was poor. In that it's pretty easy to see that they're mundane things and not something strange. But, this happens with people, and I don't blame them. You can look at a picture that you took, and you see something weird, and, birds and bugs can look kind of strange when they're close to the camera, moving very quickly, and if you don't have any experience with that, you wouldn't know otherwise.
Right, and a lot of people are shooting up toward the sun. They're going to get all kinds of images, that are strange.
All right, well, that's it for the news. We'll go ahead and get on to our interview with Glenn. But thank you once again for joining us, Mr. Martin Willis from Podcast UFO.
Always my pleasure.
All right, after the break, we will be talking to Glen Gregory Means. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. I am happy to welcome for the first time to the show Glen Means. Hello, how are ya?
Great, Alejandro. How about you?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Trying to get myself collected this morning, so I'm a little scattered in my thoughts. I'll apologize ahead of time.
Well, we expect that from folks that live on the left coast.
Yeah, we're scatterbrains out here. So let's start out with, your background. So I found connection to you through Morgan Bell, who used to be the MUFON state director out there, probably still affiliated with MUFON, but a good friend of mine. And so that's where you're from?
I call Florida home, but I roam a lot. I actually live on the border of Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. It's a borderless tri-state region that a lot of people don't have a full set of teeth, but I like it. It's peaceful.
Yeah. And who needs teeth? I mean, it makes life interesting.
And I'm beginning to really appreciate baby food again.
Yeah, I'm sure. So they have a run for baby food at the grocery store there.
Oh, they see me coming. Yeah, they usually restock.
Mm-hmm. So, UFOs, how long have you been investigating, or how long have you been into the topic?
Wow, that's going to go back about almost 50 years. I started seeing things in the sky that just didn't make sense, and I lived around military bases a lot when I was growing up overseas, so I knew what airplanes looked like, knew what helicopters looked like, knew what rockets looked like, but I started seeing things when I was about 9 that I couldn't explain. So when I got old enough to have a driver's license, I started chasing after them. And by then I was living in this country, good old US of A. And I found other people that were also interested. And so we just kind of would start to look deeper into the subject. And I even got to get involved with the folks from NICAP. I don't know if you're old enough to remember NICAP.
Yeah.
They were one of the very first organizations that looked into this stuff, along with MUFON. And I've also worked with, in addition to MUFON and NICAP, I've also worked with NUFORC, which is the National UFO Reporting Center.
Yeah, so you've done a lot of work for quite some time in the field.
Yeah, I've been around a while.
Mm-hmm. And what was your goal? Like, why did you decide to get involved in that manner? What were you looking to do?
Well, I had a period of time where, for 20 years, I was active duty Air Force in special operations. And I experienced things then, along with many other flyers, that could not be explained. But it was just kind of an understood that when you're in the military, or even when you're in the commercial civilian air world, if you see things in the sky or your radar, you really don't want to discuss it because bad things could happen. You could be pulled aside for an investigation. You could be medically disqualified. So I kind of put my jets on chill mode for those 20 years when I was in Air Force Special Operations. And then when I retired from the Air Force, it was shortly after that, living again in Panhandle, Florida, which is a real hot spot. You may have heard of Gulf Breeze, Florida. Mm-hmm. And I lived just down the highway from Gulf Breeze. And one night, we were hosting a Monday night football party. And most everybody was outside. I was inside cooking, of course, because that's another one of my hobbies. And my two sons, my two mostly adult sons, came and got me out of the kitchen and said, "Dad, you got to come out on the street and see this." So I came running out the street with them, and there before us, and there was quite a group of us standing out in the middle of the street, neighbors and friends, and of course my sons and myself. And some of the neighbors were active duty Air Force. Some of the neighbors were law enforcement. We all stood in the street for about 10 minutes watching an air show by 5 orange balls of light, or what we call ovals in the UFO business. And they really put on quite a show before they departed. And I tried to get a recording on video camera, and as soon as I hit play, or record rather, oddly enough, my video camera's battery died. And it was fully charged when I started. So I thought, well, that's interesting. So we watched the show until it was over, and then when it was over, my sons looked at me and said, "Dad, what were we looking at?" And I said, "I don't know, guys, but I'm going to do my best to find out." And that reignited my fire to learn and know more, and that connected me with NUFORC and reconnected me with NICAP, and that eventually led to me being recruited by the MUFON Midwest director and former NASA rocket scientist, Dr. Jack Kasher. I don't know if you've had Dr. Jack on your show, but he's quite the brain, multi-level PhD, way above my level, and he's experienced it all. He was directly involved in the space shuttle program with NASA, and he's written several books since his retirement from NASA. So I'm going to give him a plug right there. Check out Dr. Jack Kasher's books. You'll see some pretty spectacular things regarding photographs of UFOs from space.
Yeah, Dr. Jack Kasher's great. Really interesting person. So that's pretty cool. With these orange lights, were they zigzagging, or what sort of movements were they making?
They didn't make any sudden movements. They made okay, I'm used to seeing military air shows, being retired Air Force. And so I know all kinds of formations. I know all kinds of aircraft. And these 5 orange lights that we saw, that, by the way, thousands of other people saw that night, because up and down the Gulf Coast of Florida, it was good weather. A lot of people were outdoors. I want to say it was late fall. And a lot of people saw that. They basically started out in different parts of the sky, and I didn't see this part. They came and got me, and by the time they had come and got me, they were in 2 rows, a row of 2 up top and a row of 3 interspersed below them. So basically it formed a W. And I jokingly said, well, that means that's going to be a win for the Colts against the Steelers, because there's a W that we're looking at there. And everybody laughed, but suddenly the W wasn't a W anymore. The 2 on top came down to join the 3 on the bottom, and now it's a straight line of 5. And then the straight line of 5 did various maneuvers. Again, very, very precise, but not fast like a jet or even a helicopter, just casual, like they were playing, like they knew they were being watched and they decided to put on an air show. And then eventually they wound up back in a W, and then they rejoined to that single line formation. And at the end of the show, one by one, from each end, alternating, they zipped off to their direction, and they were gone. They were completely out of our eyesight within 2 seconds. So, they had to be really hauling to get out of eyesight within 2 seconds on a clear black sky.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So you keep calling it a show. Do you think that's what it was? Do you think this was intentional?
I do believe so. I've since investigated a lot of oval reports and mass oval sightings. In fact, one of the biggest cases I ever handled for MUFON was a multi-week oval show that went on in the northern half of Indiana, lower Michigan, and a little bit of Illinois. And I think we had a total of 38 verified oval cases I was put in charge of. And the odd thing was, most of the times when people see orange balls of light in the sky, they get excited, or they're wondering what they're looking at. Some people even report feelings of euphoria or friendship with the ovals, and we're not sure if the ovals are broadcasting that out. But in this particular case of mass sightings that lasted for weeks, mostly in northern Indiana, it was, I want to say, February and March of 2008. For those of you that want to look all that stuff up, you'll see my name on the bottom lines in most of the reports. This was the odd part. Most of the witnesses, the great majority of witnesses in those 38 cases, felt fear. They actually were frightened by the ovals and could not wait to get behind closed and locked doors. And that is a very, very unusual case when it comes to ovals and UFOs in particular. Most people see something unknown in the sky. What's their natural reaction? They're curious. They want to see more. They want to understand what they're looking at. Mm-hmm. But fear is very uncommon, and this was the antithesis of that.
That's pretty strange. What year was your sighting with the orbs?
Oh, my earliest sighting? I would have to say I was probably 8 or 9 years old overseas. I grew up.
Oh, sorry. We'll get into that. But I mean the one that you saw with your sons.
Oh, okay. That would have been sometime in the late fall of 2003. Okay. Because I retired in July of 2003.
Okay, but you were getting into something interesting too before when you were talking about where you grew up.
Refresh my memory. I've seen a squirrel or a shiny object since then, and squirrel. My memory went.
So,
what was I talking about?
Which is interesting. So you said you were a military brat essentially, and that you grew up elsewhere.
Oh, yeah. I was born in Hawaii before it was a state, moved to the Philippines, lived in Guam, Saipan, Japan, finally came to the U.S. of A. Just before going to high school, and that was my introduction to America. I mean, we'd been here before on visits to visit family, but I'd seen things overseas I loved, I'm a normal kid. I liked being outdoors, whether it was day or night. And when you're on an island, say Guam or the Philippines, generally speaking, you're going to have clear skies unless it's typhoon season. And even the typhoons will blow away, in a couple of days. So the majority of my time growing up, I had clear skies. So I loved watching the sky. I loved watching the stars. And I saw ovals. I saw other things that I couldn't explain. And that always, you're a kid. You're curious. You're still in that age where your brain hasn't been put inside the big adult box. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. And
most of my best witnesses were kids.
And you continued to have sightings while you were in the Air Force, and you said other colleagues of yours had sightings as well.
That's correct, and I'm not going to call any of them out on the radio, but they know who I'm mentioning when I tell them that I had crew members that we would basically see something on our radars, or we would even see something out the window of the cockpit, and we would all basically look at each other like we're mentally asking each other, y'all saw that, right?
Mm-hmm.
But nobody said a word, and we all just went back to the mission at hand, and it never got discussed. And because it was understood that if you're, whether you're military or a civilian flyer, there are certain organizations and agencies that kind of get, well, I won't say upset. That might be too strong a word. But they don't like their air crew and their pilots, they don't like hearing about their air crew and pilots reporting things that shouldn't be there.
Mm-hmm. So they just don't get reported.
Right. The great many don't. I have actually handled a couple of military air cases that did get reported, and there have been a number of civilian air sightings by pilots and crew members. There's really some famous ones that have been put into various different television shows on Discovery Investigates, UFO Hunters, History Channel, all the different networks that occasionally touch on this subject. Probably the biggest one that comes to mind was the JAL 747 flight that was up over Alaska, and it was either on the way to Japan or on the way from Japan, and the entire flight deck crew saw a ginormous UFO, saw a craft that was actually pacing them, several thousand feet away. But they said it was large enough it could have been an aircraft carrier in the sky.
Mm-hmm.
And they had it on radar from Alaska, from both a civilian air traffic radar and also a military traffic radar. And there was radio communications that was recorded where the military radio frequencies, the radar ops said, yeah, we see it too. We're launching somebody to go check it out. There were civilian air traffic communications that were recorded that said, yeah, we see it. It's at one point it flew away, and then it came back, and it got really, really close to the 747, and that's when the 747 flight crew from JAL, and it was a senior pilot for JAL too. And guess what happened to him after all this came to light?
What's that?
He was grounded by JAL and never flew again for the airline.
Mm-hmm. And for that incident?
That's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Before that incident?
No, because of it is why he was grounded?
Oh no.
Okay.
Of course not. I'm sure they were able to put something on paper that had nothing to do with UFOs.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, interesting. So that one was the late 80s. That is a famous one. I mean, especially when it happened, it made some news and it was a big deal.
It sure did. And since then, there have been a few others. There have been some close calls over Britain between commercial air traffic and UFOs, and a couple of times over in Europe involving military aircraft, including top-of-the-line fighter planes and UFOs. And the fighter planes would give chase, and that's when the UFO would just put it into overdrive and say bye-bye, and they're gone. President Reagan's Western White House, when Ronald Reagan was still president, he had a Western White House out in Texas, and UFOs 2 or 3 nights in a row buzzed his Western White House. And the Secret Service were like, we don't know what to do about this, but call the Air Force. Well, the Air Force responded with F-16, which are really fast jets, and they're built to fly against other aircraft, and the F-16 pilots were just astonished because whenever they'd show up, the UFOs would just make them look sick.
So with the cases that you were involved in, was there, do you remember a particular time, especially maybe when you were in the Air Force, along with other Air Force people, where there's a real wow, a sighting?
Wow. I can without going into great detail, because even though I'm retired, I'm still bound by a non-disclosure agreement for 25 years. That I can't talk about anything that might possibly be classified. I can say one particular instance that everybody looked at each other, and it was like, holy cow. We saw, on radar only, we never got a visual on it, but we saw something moving in excess of 3,500 miles an hour, well above normal air-breathing aircraft altitude. And we saw it make several 90 or sharper degree turns at those speeds. I mean, when you're traveling about 3,500 miles an hour at extremely high altitude, to be able to make a 90-degree turn or sharper, that should have ripped that craft in half.
Mm-hmm.
And we watched it for probably a good 8 minutes, just playing out by us. I mean, we never got visual on it, but and everybody on the aircraft that had a radar scope saw it.
What's interesting about these cases and what you're reporting is especially at this time, because I just posted a story recently about a Yugoslav general. He was in charge of the air defense and everything in the 70s. And they were seeing a UFO in 1975, January and February, on a regular basis. He decided to try to chase it a couple times, and it would just outmaneuver them, and they didn't have a chance. They even called in a couple MiGs that were supersonic at the time, and they, couldn't catch this thing. So it seems like the story over and over again is like that, with the military sightings. These objects are seen, they're either ignored, or if they're taken seriously, an attempt to chase them or get closer is made, and they can't get anywhere near them.
Right, and I would point out something, too, that's kind of unique to American military forces. And I wanted to clarify something. In this country, in the U.S., UFOs are looked down upon. They're giggled at by the news media. Authorities kind of look the other way and just ignore it or say it's not happening. But guess what? In many, many other first world nations, you mentioned Czechoslovakia or Yugoslavia, most Eastern Bloc nations, most of Europe, Great Britain, Germany, France, Italy, the Netherlands, Belgium, most of the nations of South America and Central America, most of the nations of Asia, all of them say, most of them, great majority of them say UFOs are real. We're very interested in them. We're constantly investigating them. We're constantly encountering them. And a lot of times it's front page news. Just take our neighbor to the south or the north. The Mexican military, the Canadian Defense Forces have never hidden anything. They've always acknowledged that, as far as we can tell, this is not a man-made craft. It performs like nothing we've ever seen. It happens all the time. And a lot of times it's on front page news in other nations, in other major nations. But in America, in the United States, if the news does a story on a UFO, they use the giggle factor. They make fun of it, or they make fun of the people that saw it. And that's to ridicule people so that they won't, if they are a witness to something, they won't report it.
Now, what's interesting about what you're saying, too, is that those other countries, like the case that I just mentioned, or if you take Chile, for example,
yes,
they have actually had meetings, even recently, with heads of the nation to talk about UFOs, and they've kind of come to the same conclusion that you and your colleagues and this Yugoslav general has come to, which was that we can't catch them. They appear sometimes, but they don't seem to be wanting to hurt us at all. So,
right.
And that's the conclusion, is that essentially they're here. We don't know what they are, but at least they don't seem dangerous. We'll continue to look into it. At least that's what Chile has said. But at least there's nothing to really worry about right now. There's no big national defense issue.
No.
And do you think the United States has that same perception or stance? Or do you think they completely ignore it? Or is there this giant conspiracy like many people think?
Unfortunately, I'm going to have to go with C on that one, Art.
Mm-hmm.
I gotta say that there are people in government that do have high enough clearances to know about this stuff. We've heard quotes from different presidents and different members of our government down through the decades who have tried to get the details and tried to get knowledge about UFOs and what the U.S. government knows. And basically what those government officials, including presidents, have told people is, they said I didn't have a need to know. And that is their all protective shield that those who really, I mean, a lot of the news lately has been about the deep state. All right. It's mostly dealing with politics and about the politics behind politics. But I do firmly believe that there is a deep state and that deep state has long been aware of UFOs and maybe to some extent even collaborated with certain alien races. We do have evidence of other nations collaborating with alien nations earlier on in history, as recently as, let's take the Nazis of World War II. The Nazis actually developed a UFO building program where they built 3 different sizes of flying saucers based on designs that were given them by an alien race.
Well, what makes you believe that?
Because I've seen the big black thick German binders written all in German that were translated, along with the pictures and some old films of German Nazi UFOs. But the stipulation was they could not be used or they could not be weaponized for the war. And the Germans didn't listen. They did try to weaponize. In one case, they took the largest UFO they built and they tried to attach a Panzer tank cannon, the main battle cannon for a Panzer tank, which is huge, to the bottom of the UFO. And the UFO was the flying saucer the Germans built was able to take off with it and was able to fly with it. But the first time they tried to fire that cannon as a test...
To break, you were talking about how you believe the Nazis had this program. And there's this mythology out there about the Nazis having spoken with aliens and created these craft and things like that. But I'm curious, what makes you believe that is real?
Let's go to modern media today in America, all right? You got a director out there named Steven Spielberg, and you got another director out there named George Lucas. These guys don't just make fun movies, okay? They make great movies, but they do their homework. Let's take Indiana Jones, all right? That entire series of Indiana Jones movies that were done by Spielberg, starring Harrison Ford. Fun movies, lots of action, but what was the overall theme of, basically the Indiana Jones character? He was out there trying to thwart other nations' seizures of high technology that we didn't want in other hands. Basically, he was out there battling Nazis who were using or trying to secure weapons of mass destruction that were very advanced. In one case, it was religious. In another case, it was highly technical. But in the end, when Indy and his American pals were able to roll up the Nazis and secure the weapons, what did they do with them, Alejandro? You remember?
They sealed them up and
created them.
Yeah.
Yep. They put them in huge warehouses, somewhere hidden away, never to be seen or heard from again.
But that was a movie. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm skeptical about the Nazi stuff. But getting back into your cases with cases that you've actually directly worked on.
Sure.
So when you got out of the military, then you've had this lifetime of experience with sightings. Then you decided to get involved with some of these other investigative groups like MUFON and NICAP and NUFORC. And
right.
all of that. Did you run into some pretty cool cases there?
Oh, yeah. without going into, again, great detail, but if people that are listening are MUFON members, then they'll have access to the MUFON databases. They can look up some of the cases that I helped work. There was when I lived in Omaha, we had some fun cases. We had a lady that lived on a ranch out in the middle of Nebraska. Actually, it was in extreme northern Kansas, just across the Nebraska line, who lived by herself. She had a dog, I think, and that was about it. But she was like a pioneering spirit woman. You know, she's out there on this farm or this ranch, taking care of everything, taking care of business every day. And one day, she went out to hang some clothes on the line and realized she wasn't alone. There was a little gray entity, and the little gray entity had brought a pet with it. And her description of the pet, if I can remember her words, if you were to combine a pit bull with an asparagus plant.
Oh,
that's
my
what
gosh.
This creature was. I know. You asked for it. I'm telling you some of the
No,
most
that's
bizarre
great.
cases
This is
that I've
interesting.
handled.
I haven't heard of anything like this.
Oh, yeah. Well, the bottom line to it was she got to see the pit bull asparagus or asparagus pit bull up close and personal because it charged her and attacked her. And before the little gray entity could call it off and make it return to him, this creature, this asparagus pit bull, actually attacked her physically, tore up her blouse. I think she had some minor scratch wounds where she actually bled from them. But there was also some, whatever you want to call it. We'll go with dog slobber. Yeah, that's the name we'll use. Dog slobber. And that was left behind on the blouse. And of course, when she called the authorities to report what she had seen, it's really nice when you're dealing with a police department or a local law enforcement agency that actually knows who to call in this case. And they called us. They called MUFON. And they had gone out, taken her report, taken pictures. We went out, and we got samples from the blouse and sent them to laboratories to find out what is this supposed dog slobber. And it was all biological material that you would not find, that you would not have trouble finding here on Earth. It wasn't necessarily dog slobber, but there was nothing unusual about it, is what I'm trying to say.
Mm-hmm.
But the whole case was just bizarre. And the woman actually put in a video security system with cameras so that, if anything like that ever happened again, she'd at least have it on camera. But she healed from her wounds, and to my knowledge, there's not been another attack. But then there was a case in Indiana that was very, very dog-centric. Sorry, I'm a dog person, and I get these cases that involve dogs sometimes. There was bulldogs are very, very staunch. They defend their territory. They defend their people. And one night, this lady went to let her adult male bulldog out the door so it could do its business before bed. And normally the dog comes right back up onto the porch and lets her know by, basically scratching at the door, hey, I'm done, I want in. Well, she didn't hear from the dog for about 10 minutes, and it was very unusual because normally the dog just did its business and came right back. So after about 10 minutes, she went to the door and opened the inside door. There was still a glass, outer door. And she saw the dog squared up in the yard in front of the steps coming up to the porch, basically squared off against a number of floating orbs of different colors. She said there were yellow, there were white, there were blue, and there was one giant red one that was kind of sitting off in the trees about 30 feet up. She said it estimated maybe 30 feet across. And these other things were like anywhere from the size of a tennis ball to a blown-up beach ball. And there were different colors. And they were just kind of flitting about in the woods. And the dog had taken up a defensive posture right at the bottom of the stairs. And she called to the dog because she was suddenly scared. And she tried to get the dog to come up the stairs and come in. The dog refused to budge. The dog was not giving way. And all of a sudden, she ran out the off the porch, down the steps, because one of the groups of orbs had decided to go towards the dog, and she feared for the dog. And the dog was barking and growling by then, and sensed that something bad was about to happen. And the woman grabbed the dog, picked it up, and that's a heft, because that dog, I met that dog, and that dog was not light. And she grabbed him and ran up the steps and got back inside and closed the door just as that orb, which had followed them the whole way, a very short chase, but the orb basically went up, straight up, right at her glass outer door. And when it did so, it left some deposits of some kind of spotting on her glass, on her door glass. She slammed the wooden door shut, the inner wooden door, and locked it. And then she went to her living room window to watch to see what these lights would do. Well, they just kind of hung out and, floated around. And then, oddly enough, she got sleepy. And she went and laid down on her living room couch. And in the morning when she woke up, she remembered, and she went out and looked, and there was no sign of any, balls of light. And she went back, and then she found her dog. Her dog was completely blind, and the eyes of the dog were completely gooped over and sealed shut. And she immediately took him to the vet on emergency notice. And she lived in the middle of a large city in Indiana. So, metropolitan city. And this had happened, and apparently nobody saw it but her, because she had a fairly large lot of numerous acres with a lot of thick trees right in the middle of the downtown of the city of Fort Wayne. And she got to the dog to the vet, and the vet treated the dog for severe flash burns to its eyes. And they said It looked like the dog had been staring at an arc welder for like minutes, because his eyes were that damaged. And they continued to treat the dog for a period of about 2 months. The dog was able to eventually regain some eyesight, but now that dog, to this day, refuses to go outside to do his business. She actually has to pick the dog up, carry him down, put him in the grass. He'll do his business right there, and then the dog is zoop, right back up the steps and into the house. Now, that's saying something, because a bulldog or any type of work dog like that, they're very territorial. And for that dog to have a lasting fear memory of being outside alone after dark, that says something.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Really kind of pretty creepy. Both of these stories are pretty scary. So
now, I should tell you, though, that's rare in the UFO investigation business. Most of these cases that I've handled have been the exact opposite. Whether it's just UFOs or UFOs and aliens, people reported generally friendly encounters or exciting encounters, but not fearful ones.
So when it came to abductions and these sort of people having experiences or claiming to have experiences with beings and creatures, what did you think of that when you ran across that at first?
Honestly, I tried to keep an open mind, and there's a plug for your show, because when I first started dealing with this, I was dealing with, military mindset, career flyer, thousands of hours in the air in multiple types of aircraft. So I'm interested in the craft. I'm interested in how does this work? How's it built? And when I would encounter cases where people encounter aliens, I would just kind of shove it off to the side in my brain, as that's not germane to what MUFON's about. Because at the time, MUFON's goal and their mantra was to learn about UFOs and their technology for the betterment of mankind, so that we could advance our technology. Over the years, MUFON has modified that stance to include alien contact and learning more about that. They even have their own, MUFON has a board that's investigators, doctors, psychiatrists, hypnotherapists, all of these people come together in MUFON. We have a lot of specialties in MUFON, a lot of very, very smart people. And we have one section of MUFON now that deals with alien abduction, or as they call it, experiencers. Some people don't like to be called an abductee, so they go by experiencers now. and we're working with them on that. I've actually personally started a couple of experiencer support groups, and there's one down in Muncie that I'm aware of, and there's one in Kokomo, Indiana that I helped get going, and they're all over the country. There's a lot of them out there in California too.
Mm-hmm. Now, you had mentioned in these other cases, I mean, it sounds like you believed the witnesses.
You have to take everything at face value until you can prove otherwise.
Mm-hmm.
I don't look at it as, why are these people going to lie? And I will tell you, in all the hundreds of cases that I've investigated, I would say easily less than 5% were hoaxes, and I smelled it right away. Mm-hmm. There were little telltale signs that this was a story, not a reality. But I'd say less than 5% of all the hundreds of cases I've done over the years were hoaxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the reason I ask you about that, because when I was investigating UFOs, that's when I first ran across, I didn't really get too into abductions at the beginning, but then I started running into these people, and people felt comfortable enough to share these experiences with me, and it's hard because they're really interesting stories, and these are very credible people. These are people who and who were genuinely affected by something. They genuinely, you could tell, had emotion and so it sounds like
I'll give you a personal. Let me give you a personal aspect to this. I after one particular MUFON symposium, an international symposium that we hold once a year, and this was held out in California, I had the good fortune to work with the late, great Bud Hopkins. Bud Hopkins was, for lack of a better term, a very spiritual man, and he was an excellent listener, and he was also a pretty darn good hypnotherapist without ever being licensed as a hypnotherapist. And he pretty much made it his work in the last part of his life to help abductees or experiencers deal with those emotions and realize that they're not alone and that they're still here. And after working with Bud Hopkins on a couple of cases, I brought up a member of my family that I thought might have been at one point an experiencer. And I gave Bud, some examples, and he looked at me and he said, he's not the only one in your family that's probably an experiencer. And I looked at him, and that's when I knew what he was saying. He was telling me, I need to look deep into my own memories. I need to talk to somebody, because he was saying, Glenn, I think you're an experiencer, and that's why you're doing this now. That's why you're investigating. It's driven you because you've had experiences and you want to get to the bottom of it. So eventually I contacted Craig Lang, who was a member of the MUFON experiencer team, and Craig has since hypnotized me on several occasions and brought out hidden memories that had been blocked. And my abductions, my own personal alien abductions, started when I was 6 years old. And they've continued until real recently. I think I was just snorked again a few weeks ago down in Florida.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So what do you think, why do you feel that's happening? Why do you feel that you're being taken?
In my own personal case, what has come out from the hypnotic regression sessions where, the hypnotist takes you back to those times and walks you through the experience, in every case but one, and that was the one that was when I was 6 years old, it was just a very frightening case. But in every other case since then, up until, this time in my life, they have come and they have taken me and they have shown me things, actually personally shown me things and told me things that are or were about to be, and that they would then tell me, we're going to take you back now. We need you to contact people that you know that would have an interest in these things and might be able to help humanity. So they were doing this to give me a message that I could pass along, because I've known a lot of people in my lives, in my many careers that I've had. I was also a journalist at one point. I I worked for CNN when CNN was brand new. I covered the Reagan campaign through the Midwest.
Wow.
So I know a lot of people, and they know that I know a lot of people. So they've come to me on numerous occasions and said, we're going to show you something. Might not be good, might not be bad, but you need to let some people know about this. The best example I can give you, Alejandro, is I was taken under the ocean in several locations around the earth, and I was shown gigantic gray blobs, for lack of a better description. Do you know what an amoeba is? Do you remember your high school biology? Okay, basically a singular-celled organism that lives to eat, crap, and procreate by splitting. I was looking at a gigantic amoeba several times over. These things were huge, and they showed me several of them. And then when they brought me back to take me home, they said, these are not of your Earth. They are not of your planet. They have been brought here and planted in your oceans because they are devouring everything they encounter in your oceans. And if your oceans die, guess what happens to humanity? You die. And that sank home real quick. And as soon as they, released me, I told some people at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute that I knew, that I went to school with. I told some other people in the Coast Guard and the Navy that I knew. And lo and behold, the Coast Guard was alerted to a large, unusual object off the southern coast of Alaska about 3 months after my abduction. They had found the first one. Fishermen had actually got their nets tangled in it, and they had no idea what to do about it. So they called the Coast Guard, which sent out a small boat. The small boat called for a larger boat. The larger boat called for a Coast Guard frigate and air support. And by the time they had a measurement on this thing, it was 5 miles wide and 12 miles long.
Wow.
They took samples of it. They sent it off to several marine biology labs, including Woods Hole. And guess what they came back with? It's a very basic amoeba-like creature that just exists to eat and split and get bigger. They found
really
two more
strange.
One off the coast of Africa, one off the coast of the Med.
Wow. I'll have to look into that. Unfortunately, we're getting into really interesting stuff, so wouldn't you know it, we're out of time. Really,
Murphy's
really...
Law.
Yeah, exactly. So, great conversation. Thank you so much for joining me. And I guess, are you still doing are you still with MUFON? I think you said you retired from that.
I've retired from MUFON. However, I'm still a consultant with MUFON and Newfork. When a big case comes up, I recently was involved in a couple of large cases that I can't disclose because they're still being investigated by MUFON. But my name is not on any of the paperwork because, again, as an experiencer or alien abductee, I don't want haters out there saying, oh, well, he's already drank the grape Kool-Aid, so we can't believe anything that he puts his name to. So that's one of the reasons I retired from MUFON, was to not besmirch any of their investigative works.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. Really interesting stuff, so we'll have to keep in touch.
Sounds good, Alejandro. I enjoyed it and look forward to hearing from you again.
Thank you so much for Glen Gregory Means for being on the show. Super interesting stuff. And you know what? The timing is just so cool because of that Yugoslavian story that I had written about in the general. And then with Glenn coming on, reinforcing this idea of just people being super worried about reporting things because they don't want to be made fun of. Other news, if you need to get a room and you want to go to the Congress this year, the rooms are going really fast, so I recommend you go to ufocongress.com, look up the hotels there, and get your rooms. Soon, the host hotel will be sold out, but as you can see at the site, we have a lot of deals with other nearby hotels. In fact, one of the hotels has a free shuttle that'll take people back and forth. They usually don't run the entire weekend, but they do for our event. So really nice people at the Comfort Inn there in and Fountain Hills. So there are nearby alternatives that you can find and discounts that we've gotten for our group from a lot of these places. And we'll have more discounts even posted soon. So you can find all that at ufocongress.com, including some of the speakers that we've got listed so far. I think we only have one lecture listed, but we have some of the speakers listed, and we'll have more about their lectures listed soon. And in the next week or so, we're going to have a lot more information up there. So be sure to check ufocongress.com regularly for more information on that. And to get updates on what Open Minds is doing and the UFO Congress, you can register to our email list. So you can do that at openminds.tv or at ufocongress.com. You'll see a little blue box that says, enter your email address. And I highly recommend people do that because it keeps you up to date on some of these stories that we post, what's going on with the Congress, and of course, all of the latest podcasts, so you don't miss any of those. So this is a little bit of a treat. You're being able to get to listen to this podcast earlier than usual. We still will be on KGRA Tuesday night, and we'll have a new show next week, but that'll be our regular time. So it'll air at KGRA Monday night, and then on Open Minds, it will be posted on Tuesday. So I hope you all have a wonderful week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you to Caleb Hanks for the opening and close music. Thank you to Martin Willis from Podcast UFO for joining us with the news. And of course, as usual, thank you so much to you, the most awesomest of the awesome, the listeners. I'm